Welcome, everyone. If you'd like to take a seat, we're going to get started pretty shortly. My name is Eleanor Chai. I am with AT&T. I lead on our healthcare practice, but today's conversation is not about me at all. Today's conversation is about new care deliveries, using cutting-edge technologies and solutions, and having a really spirited conversation about what's new in the marketplace, what has really made a difference, and then more importantly as well, what can we do about the barriers to improve adoption of these new care deliveries and technologies. So we're very fortunate today to have three panelists with us representing across different parts of our industry. We have Samir here, who is founder and CEO of MD Revolution. To his right, we have David O'Reilly with Proteus Health. And then further to our right, another David Van Sickle, who is with Propeller Health, previously known as Osmopolis, but I'm sure, David, you'll explain the evolution of your product and company. So I'm going to actually start off with having each of our panelists introduce themselves a little to you, talk about their products and solutions, and then we're going to go straight into a facilitated dialogue, and then I'll open it up to the audience for Q&A as well. All right, so why don't we start with Samir?
All right. So just earlier this month, the CDC released a report saying that this year 200,000 people are going to die from heart disease and stroke, and that 6 out of 10 of those people will be less than the age of 65. More globally, 80% of heart disease is preventable, about 40% of cancers. If you look at the most common cancers, colon, lung, breast, prostate, they're all driven by risk factors such as visceral adiposity, things like low fitness, body fat, high body fat, obesity, poor diet. All of them are modifiable. If you flip it and look at the economic burden, employers every year are losing about $1 trillion in lost productivity, as well as the U.S. government pays out about 80% of the $2.6 trillion on preventable chronic diseases like diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. So the reality is that we are facing a crisis in magnitude akin to what we saw with the financial crisis in 2008, but it's a slow crisis. It's slowly coming and brewing, and it's one that the U.S. Treasury is not going to be able to bail us out from. It's one that we as consumers of health and healthcare and physicians have to redefine and re-engineer the way we deliver healthcare, and this is where connected health can play a large role. So in 2010, in my cardiology practice, I started using things that are actually being sold in Best Buy and Apple stores across the country. Here's a Withings scale, which would allow me to get what a patient weighs on my app when they're anywhere in San Diego. And when they put on weight, I know. When they lose a few pounds, I can send them an encouraging email. My patients with hypertension started monitoring their blood pressure with another Withings device that would allow me to dose their medications at various times, knowing that some people have higher blood pressures in the morning, others have higher at night. I found that people started really paying attention to their health. My elderly people who actually thought exercise was raking leaves in their backyard, I gave them heart rate monitors, which then I would be able to show them when they'd come to their visit that, their heart rate was not really where it needed to be when they were raking leaves, that they really needed to do exercise, not physical activity. On occasion, I'd have people log their nutrition on MyFitnessPal and show them how they need to not only time their meals differently, but eat differently. And then, pedometers, they're actually quite effective. I have one now, and, I'm actually traveling. I know I'm probably not going to get the number of steps I need today. I'm only at 1,500 steps, and you need to get at least 7,000 to 10,000. So all this stuff was really helpful in increasing awareness of patients and people really starting to take control of their health. The problem is it wasn't scalable. And so what we did is in 2011 at MD Revolution, we tried to really harness the power where we went away from siloed solutions or siloed data to a situation where people now could come and see a health coach or a personal trainer or an IT specialist, and they would actually show them how to use these devices. So now a doctor's coordinating care with some nurses and health coaches and these people that are physician extenders. That's really the future where healthcare is going. And so now you're a maestro of an orchestra rather than a one-on-one deliverer of a statin or a pill that really doesn't modify the risk factors that we're trying to change. And so the next step we did was realize that, not only did you need to build the model, you had to build the software. Because the reality is that all these data streams are going to individual apps. And as a physician or as a healthcare practitioner, it's not functional. But you have engineers trying to build solutions for a problem they don't understand. And so what we had to do is we had to come up with the software ourselves after looking long and hard. And so what we came up with was RevUp Health Accelerator, which you see right now. And we're using it in our practice. We've had over 500 patients come through our practice. And we also are using it in the corporate wellness setting. So what you're seeing here on your left is a point system that's tied to every time someone logs, they get certain points. Or if they exercise with a heart rate above a certain rate, they get points. If they're not doing it, we get automated alerts on the clinical interface, which is our back end, where our nurses and our health coaches send emails and text messages to really complete that behavioral loop that's absolutely necessary if we're going to see behavior change. But like Ted Med, Thomas Getz said at Ted Med, who was the executive editor at Wired, he said, in 2010 that better health is not a science problem. It's an information and education problem. So what we at MD Revolution are doing both for employers as well as for physician practices is actually having built the model of patient engagement through the use of connected health, but closing the loop through the ability to give real-time feedback and monitoring. And so that's what we're doing. We have a software as a service platform that we currently are delivering to Sharp Healthcare, and we're seeing really dramatic rates of participation, upwards of 70%, and our outcomes are seeing anywhere between 80 and 90% reductions in body fat. 80-90% of our people are seeing reductions in body fat, visceral fat, improvements in resting metabolism, quite dramatic findings, things that I've never seen to date. So that's where we are.
Thanks for that, Samir. Why don't we now turn over to David O'Reilly to talk to us about your company. I think what's really fascinating about Proteus is when we think new care deliveries, we're talking pills and ingestibles, so would love to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. Wanted to acknowledge my friend and colleague George Savage, who's in the audience and one of the co-founders of Proteus. You should all seek him out. He's a true entrepreneur and has delivered many care delivery technologies, and so should chat with him during the conference. So Proteus's idea is to connect a consumer's ingestion of their daily pills to the mobile internet. We do this to make medicines more personalized, to make them very information-rich, and to make them networked to the people involved in the care of a consumer, and to make them more highly relevant to the consumer themselves. So this is really the first time we can have a direct connection and a measurement of drug effectiveness. And so this is about effectiveness, not efficacy. We're working with existing drugs that are known to be to have efficacy, and the idea here is to make them work better in the real world. We accomplish this, as Al mentioned, with a set of very novel technologies, including an ingestible sensor and wearable sensors that can work together to make pharmaceuticals part of what we call a digital health feedback system. So this ingestible sensor is the size of a poppy seed. It's composed entirely of materials that are already in your diet. It's been approved by regulators in the US and Europe. And this year we will have manufactured and shipped approximately 10 million of them. And we're on track to do that in the hundreds of millions very shortly. So this exists today and is very real. The reason we're doing this and the reason we're part of this wave of new approaches and new care delivery efforts is on the Proteus part because we would like to transform what a pharmaceutical is from something which is a molecule that is really used and sold to care professionals to something which is actually quite consumer-centric, where the pharmaceutical business model is not something based on a chemical or a biological, but is something that is based on data and services associated with its use by consumers and its connection to actual outcomes in a very, very direct way. And the second reason we're doing this is because we believe very much in the democratization of medical products and medical technology. And we think that what we and others are doing as part of this wave we've seen with the rise of the internet and other mobile technologies, where healthcare information was rapidly democratized, where me as a consumer could get the information I need to understand my own healthcare. If we can embed technology and make it very consumer-oriented into actual medical products themselves, and then something like a pharmaceutical or a medical device becomes less like this foreign thing, which is really the product for the institutional healthcare system and the health professional, and it becomes mine as much as my mobile phone, and it becomes a highly personalized thing which I can take into my life and which can be part of my decision making, not decisions which are made for me.
Great, wonderful. And now we come over to David Van Sickle to share with us about the work that you do at Propeller Health.
Great, thanks, Elle, and thanks to the group partners for the invitation to be here today. I'm one of the co-founders of Propeller, which is best known probably as Mapless, our former name. We recognized an opportunity to apply the technology that we're best known for, which is putting sensors onto inhaled medications, really to the large population with COPD as well as asthma. And so, as Mapless, while unique and memorable, actually presented sort of a practical challenge. So Propeller Health today, and we have a booth out here that I would be glad to spend more time talking about the background of the company. Our goal really is to take the types of digital technology that are available today, chips, sensors, and radios, and put them into and onto the medications that people carry around already and use to manage chronic respiratory disease, asthma, COPD. And then to use that information in a way that's passively and objectively collected, to use that information to help people do a better job of accomplishing their self-management, and to give physicians and care teams the tools they need to identify folks who aren't doing well so that they can provide appropriate attention and hopefully avert a lot of the unnecessary healthcare and economic spending that goes on with these diseases, where most of the ED visits and hospitalizations really are treatment failures, and so there's a ton of opportunity for us to alleviate a lot of unnecessary suffering in both these conditions, and we're making great progress there.
Great, wonderful. Now, I wanted to expand the discussion a little beyond what we've just talked about. So each of the individuals on this panel have shared connected devices, the visibility to physicians, and how that feedback loop could make an impact. We've also had, something as, stranger than science fiction, which is reality today, the ingestibles that you take, and then the things that you can do through connected devices and mobile applications for that self-management, disease management. But beyond these, if I look to our panelists, think about the next 5 years. What have you seen recently in new care technologies that gets you really excited? Robotics, genomics, even when we're thinking about business models, new changes in business models of new care deliveries. Any thoughts here from our panelists?
I could start. Actually, the thing I'm most excited about is what's becoming very commonplace. Think about your body as a data stream. All of us are sort of talking about that in different contexts, and how commonplace that's actually getting. A lot of the different mobile health applications, which, again, it's getting kind of noisy. It's hard to tell them apart. Even I, in this field, I find it a little tedious how many different wristbands based on the same accelerometer technology are coming out. But what's happening is that people are getting very comfortable with devices that are on them and around them that are sensing their body and their behavior. And that's a great thing, because the leap then to the connection between the commonplace, something that Nike is doing or something that Apple is doing, to the connection to regulated medical products and things that are deeply involved in your healthcare and in chronic disease is not so wide. I, for the first time in 14 years, just bought a new car, so they're different. So if I have my key in my pocket and I put my hand on the handle of my car, the car opens. I love it. It's fantastic. So why is that so different than my car opening and starting based on the connection to my Proteus wearable sensor, which is also helping to manage my healthcare? That gap, that leap is becoming shorter and shorter, and that's a fantastic thing for all of us.
Great. So a big theme around connected devices, passive wearables. I've even heard that the next trend here is wearables with using visible light spectrum, so that you have continuous monitoring. So, you could wear something around your ear to continuously monitor blood sugars, as opposed to taking a read now and then with a glucometer.
Yeah, so
Thoughts
I
here?
think my take is a little different on what excites me the most. What excites me is that we are starting to realize that we need to go beyond the sensor. I mean, we can pretty much monitor just about anything, but the reality is, unless it's part of an ecosystem that delivers health, right? So it has to, how does it connect the patient, the employee, to a health coach, to a practitioner? And what's exciting is when you look at the companies that are now starting to share what we call APIs, application programming interfaces, the APIs are becoming more sophisticated. People want their data to stream to aggregate platforms and ecosystems where that data can then be effectively leveraged. At the end of the day, and hardware and sensor is only going to be useful based on the interpretation of the data that we make. And so it's really the ecosystems that are starting to develop, and people understanding that we need to develop a whole ecosystem of delivery around it, because the problems that we face in this country really aren't going to be solved by a pill or, for that matter, any single modality. It's the aggregate of all these different sensors coming together in a useful platform that's ultimately going to make the difference.
Right, right. So I think a big theme of data integration and maybe even big data. But of course, then the challenge is, we're thinking about this Maslow hierarchy of needs here in healthcare, where we see the vision, but I know that there are so many challenges today in even basic data interoperability. So we should have an interesting discussion about this later. But I wanted to go to David as well for your thoughts.
Yeah, one thing I think that's worth paying attention to is the folks outside of healthcare working on technology. And not to be a proponent of kind of solutionism here, but technology like better smoke detectors, right? Where I've in my life done an investigation of carbon monoxide fatalities, and the opportunity to build new products that actually prevent injury and illness in the first place seems to me a great place for us to spend some time and attention. And certainly we're making, I think, good progress across digital health, but it's tough, and there's a lot of novel and exciting things that do have to be still put to work in effective ways.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I thought that was that is an interesting theme here as well is when we think about healthcare and monitoring of health, and then we think about the monitoring of other aspects of our lives, and it's almost like we're saying, look, they're separate and closed circles in themselves, but really what we're thinking about could well be an overlapping Venn diagram. So think about aging in place, and I know some folks hate that term, but independent living. So when we think about the sensors in the home, sensors in your care, personal emergency responder systems, now why couldn't they all fit in together? Because we're talking about holistic care, and especially when we're thinking about fitness and wellness as well. So it's really exciting to think about these new care deliveries, and I think we come to a conclusion that it's not the technology. I mean, if you look at some of the things that you all three are working on, really you have those technologies available today. So what then are those barriers? What is preventing new care delivery solutions from taking off to a bigger extent than they are? It's great to hear you're having 10 million shipments, but what would you need to expand that, Any thoughts here from any of our panelists here on what's preventing us from breaking this barrier?
Oftentimes, as technologists and product developers, we're part of the problem, right? So I did describe our technology, and we're very proud of it, but we're also very conscious at my company that it's what have you done for me lately? It is yesterday's innovation, and it is enabling. Technology is enabling. It can't be the end in itself. It's what you do with it. That's what we're all talking about. And so, and part of the challenge, I think, it's a broad challenge in healthcare in general, is that different stakeholders in it think it's so special, right? And so, and where the if part of the challenge is that you have to have the technology disappear, and you have to focus on something else. And so we feel very strongly that the focus needs to be on the consumer, and that the very few product developers, very few companies, very few institutional healthcare systems, very few doctors actually focus on the actual desires, right, of the consumer, the patient as a consumer. And if you get that right, if you do what the consumer technology industry does instinctively, right, and very intuitively, then you can start to break through some of these barriers. But you have to get past the technology and focus on the right thing.
Right, so we've been focusing maybe in product, too many bells and whistles, kind of make it simple from the consumer's perspective.
Understand what the consumer wants. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are several barriers actually to really seeing a outcome. And in this day of the Affordable Care Act, and our incentives now are finally being aligned in the right direction. So I think number one, regulation is finally pointing, and as a cardiologist, I can say my colleagues aren't always in the same position in terms of how they think about healthcare reform. I think it's great. So you're taking a fee-for-service system and now showing that value-based systems are extremely important. So in order to reach those goals, you're going to force innovation and change. And the problem has been that the healthcare system has seen innovation as, speeding up your treadmill or increasing the incline. What we need to do is think about re-engineering. And so what's happening, one of the barriers that are coming down is that, Sharp Healthcare, one of the health systems that we're delivering to, the CEO has a problem because he's the largest non-governmental employer in San Diego with over 15,000 employees, and every year he writes a check to his health plan for $155 million just to cover health insurance benefits for his employees. And so what they realize they can't sustain, nor in the insurance plan model or in their employer model, that kind of model. So what they're doing is they're thinking innovation in a way that drives towards outcomes. So one of the barriers is thinking about how to take the technology and how to use it to drive outcomes. So that's good. One barrier has come down is people now are going away from a cool consumer technology to saying, what is it going to do for people? Number two, meaningful use criteria, which the electronic health records have come into existence through meaningful use criteria. So these criteria that dictate kind of what kind of functions and features the electronic health records today in existence should have. Unfortunately, to date, those systems are designed to deliver a reactive disease care system when we need to be going to more of a proactive system. So because meaningful use criteria going forward, we're seeing now that healthcare vendors are starting to think about patient engagement platforms and starting to incorporate devices and real-time data into a ecosystem to actually deliver better outcomes. And thirdly, the biggest barrier that needs to come down is really the third-party payer. We have to start seeing insurers start saying, you know what, if I'm going to spend $50,000 for a bariatric surgery or $100,000 to put a defibrillator in a failing heart, then I need to spend $200 to get a blood pressure cuff for our patient or employee. I mean, it's really quite insane when you think about the kind of money we spend towards procedures that treat disease when we could spend a fraction of that to prevent it. So the payer piece really needs to come into play before I think digital health is really going to take off.
Right. David Van Sickle, do you engage with payers? What are you seeing in terms of, or maybe you had some other thoughts, payers' slowness of adoption I mean, we did a survey a year and a half ago, and we reached out to providers, payers, et cetera, to talk about connected health, mHealth. And one of the things that was very striking about this double-blind survey, they didn't know we were surveying them. They didn't know who was surveying them, and we didn't know their specific names, but we knew their titles. What was interesting from the payer's perspective was the number one thing that was most interesting for them in mHealth was not care outcomes. That was actually what providers said, care outcomes. The number one thing for them was cost reduction, as in their own cost reduction on an administrative perspective. So I'm just wondering, hey, we've got a situation where payers, the top 10 control 80-90% of the covered lives, but at the same time, maybe there are unaligned, goals.
Yeah, two things on that. So I think we're making, as a business, good progress with payers, at-risk medical groups, integrated systems, anybody who has economic and clinical interest in better outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're able to demonstrate significant reductions in cost for really unnecessary ED visits and hospitalizations. But one thing I think, just to kind of go back to the last point, that's been a bit of a distraction has been sort of the holy grail held up in the industry, like, let's build a Farmville for health or something like that. Well, Farmville for health, ask Zynga, they've lost a quarter of their active users for the last 2 quarters now. It is engagement with even with the best made games that we have is a very difficult thing to accomplish. And so I'm really hoping we can see more emphasis on outcomes, sort of put the goal around a vaccine, right? Nobody engages with a vaccine. It's a sort of a perfect accomplishment of technology, in that it eliminates a disease and the experience of a disease and healthcare required for it. So that's where I really want to see sort of the goalposts put, and I think we'll make a lot more traction when we start heading in that direction, rather than towards sort of the means to the end.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about payers too. Again, I'll just go back to, I think sometimes we're part of the problem, because I think people, particularly technologists, have an attitude that if I've created this great thing and I have this vision of what impact it's going to have, why won't somebody pay for it? That they're the problem, right? But they're actually pretty sophisticated, right? They know their business, and you have to know who you're talking to and with whom you're negotiating. And they have all the data, and they have a lot more data than most of us do. Mm-hmm. And their data shows that new expensive drugs that get approved and have efficacy and have successful clinical trials and are 100 times more expensive than the existing standard of care, in the real world outside of clinical trials don't tend to actually move the needle. So they have that data. So why would they make any rational decision to actually pay for new technology that in all of their data across all of their years actually simply, despite the promises, tends to increase costs? Why would they do that, right? And why should we expect them to? At the same time, what payers will often tell most of us working in this field is, the way they deal with that is to say, well, go away and do an outcome study, do an effectiveness study, come back in a few years after you've done a study, which is a bit of a fool's errand, because of course they also know that they're just pushing that out in the future, and they also know that regardless of the results of your clinical trials, it's probably not going to be that effective in actual real-world use and actual effectiveness. And so the whole conversation is wrong. If you believe in technology and you believe in your approach and you can get consumer benefit and outcomes benefit, we as product developers need to own up to it, and we need to bet on it, and we need to take risk, and we need to then enter into relationships that will, if we have the data, that will benefit us and give the payer what it wants, which is, they don't, to your point, they don't really care about outcomes. So if you can structure something that actually lowers their costs by taking on risk yourself and being able to finance that, right, they will accept that with no clinical studies whatsoever, because it's a purely economic relationship. So again, we're sort of part of the problem, because we want our investors to have an immediate return, so we want somebody, after we develop new products and technologies, to pay a premium for it right away. And it will never work like that.
Right, right. If we replace payer with provider, it's probably the same conversation, isn't it? Because from a provider perspective, the margins are even more compressed. So thoughts here on vendor pricing. Would truly disruptive pricing models really change this game here, where we think about freemium or alternative business models? I mean, I think about Hippocrates and how it's managed to get significant adoption because they have a very different business model. It's not about charging the user. It's actually looking at alternative ways to generate revenues. Thoughts here?
Or like duo fertilities model is also really interesting, where they refund the money if you don't actually.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's an outcome.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we have two very different technologies. So one, you have a solution for different, diseases or different, very specific uses. When I think about payment of devices, I think about the hardware that's out there, and we are building our own hardware. We're working with some Silicon Valley companies, but the idea is, I don't really think the hardware or the price of the actual product itself is an issue. The reality is that if you can prove that, and I don't think you need to do a double-blind randomized controlled trial. I think that whole idea that it takes that kind of data in order for someone to feel comfortable that there's effectiveness it's an idea that is now in the past, because real-time data allows for very personal analyses, and you can show benefits in a lot of areas without needing these long, drawn-out trials. So I think the cost savings that can be realized by the proper use of the technologies is an order of magnitude, if not more, greater than the cost of the devices itself. When you talk about in our world, which is prevention, you're talking about physical activity, diet, exercise, all the things that will prevent 70 to 80% of all the major diseases that are causing problems in this country. So when you think about the cost of the product, I don't think that's an issue. It's also dropping. The cost is dropping. Accelerometers are getting cheaper. Semiconductor chips are getting cheaper. So I think the price is not an issue. I think what it is, it's a value-based system. We have to build value by showing what you can do with the technology. And when I say what you can do, I'm talking about how it impacts the market as a whole. So as we approach corporations, we show the data. We're a relatively young company, so we don't have years of longitudinal outcomes data. But I can guarantee you, as we show over years or even over months, that people are utilizing the system, that they have less sick days. They're showing up to work, productivity is going up. When I tell Mike Murphy, the CEO of Sharp, he sees a slow bend in the cost. He says, I'm okay if I can go from, he's going to 10% a year. He's going from 148 to 155 to 160 million. If they can just see a flattening of that curve, they're happy. So I don't think it's a cost issue. I think it's a matter of being intelligent, using data to show how value can be driven for the person buying it, whoever that may be, whether it's the provider, whether it's the patient or the employer.
Great, thank you. I also want an opportunity to open this up to the floor. If folks have questions that they'd like to ask the panelists, please do come up to our microphones. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments for our panelists. Any questions from the floor? Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
My name's Davis Graham. I'm representing Brandeis as a scholar. I'm down in Florida as a outpatient radiology center, Manatee Diagnostic. First of all, I think one of the questions I have, and you all touched on it a little bit, is for us to find as a patient or as a person wanting to get healthier, for us to find these apps and things along those lines, there's no real like cyber hospital or cyber health center. Is there some initiative to maybe make a depository or consortium so that this information is available? And then along those lines, maybe along the informational governance of it so that it can be contributed into something that gives not only heart feedback, asthma feedback, that kind of thing.
Comments from our panelists?
So yeah, you're right. There's over 40,000 apps available. So it's quite daunting for a consumer to actually figure out what's going to work for them, unless you just have a really sophisticated bunch of friends who've tried everything and quantify themselves in a variety of ways. So what we did at MD Revolution is actually create that process. So we've actually vetted, and that's what's going to take is either an organization to use these various devices in real world to know, devices and apps, to know which ones work the best. And so that's what we've done in our particular situation. In a broader context, what you're talking about is regulation of apps. And the FDA came out recently and said that they were not going to regulate apps that did not have anything with a specific diagnostic involved with it. So you're not going to get FDA regulating it. So the question is, who's going to do it? And I think that the people that are delivering ecosystems of health, so I know that there are ACO, accountable care organizations, that use certain apps, MyFitnessPal, they do their own vetting. I think what you're going to find is the deliverers of these technologies will be the ones that are ultimately telling people, here's what you need to use, because it's only real world experience that's going to figure out what's the best. And what's the best for one person might not be the best for the other person. So I guess until that day where we are in a situation where everybody is providing that in a health setting, whether it's through your corporate company, corporate wellness, or through your doctor, it's going to be tough. But in the meantime, you're welcome to come to San Diego, and we can fit you with all the different devices, and we can monitor you in any which way. So you can and we do have people across the country actually who actually come in for their assessments, and then we monitor them remotely. So that is something that we do.
My own view is that this will be like any other industry. There'll be a market-based process that shakes things out and that takes the sort of noisiness and confusion of it over time and starts to push people and pull people toward the right answers. I think it's very unlikely that there's going to be one company or one entity that is the source for that, and it'll be very market-based, and that's a very good thing. I think one trend to watch is as these types of new areas get very mature, if you look at other industries and other sectors, it's again, back to the same theme, it's rarely technology which itself disrupts a whole sector. It's usually the distribution channel, right? Innovation in the distribution channel. And so as this gets more mature, I think we should all look for entrepreneurs and others who are going to look at community-based care and how to deliver things and support these new technologies and provide education to people as digital health becomes, again, more accepted, more obvious, more demanded. The market will come up with the kind of solutions you're talking about.
David, do you have a comment as well?
Nothing that I would add to that, other than I think the regulatory landscape is actually beneficial for us. I think as we start to accumulate more evidence across the industry of effectiveness and start updating marketing claims, I think a lot more people are going to be regulated than currently are, even under the existing situation, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, largely, I think it's sort of like preventive medicine, like a lot of things that aren't super fun to do, but we recognize build in the end better products and longer lifespan of companies and higher quality. And so I don't know. I'm not so concerned about that. I think it's net positive for us.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's 90,000 applications out across the app stores. When you look at the majority health and fitness. And with previously until this new FDA regulation came out, I mean, I actually saw a real dumbing down of applications because they were concerned about FDA regulation, and so they actually scooped out everything that could be considered analytics out of the application. So all you had was tracking. So I'm excited to see now with the new guidance, medication adherence, disease management is now no longer going to be regulated before bringing to market. So it'll be interesting to see what flowers from that innovation. We have another question here from the floor.
Sure. My name is Mike Abrams. I'm a pediatric ophthalmologist. I left clinical medicine recently to get involved in connected health. What I've noticed is that connected health right now is not really that connected, that we've got this extraordinary underlying infrastructure that can reach to the patient's smart device. We've got this incredible host of devices, the sensors the patient can wear or, as you say, swallow or embed. But that last 1 to 2 meters of connectivity is just not there, that we are missing the medical body area network. And nobody's sort of willing to say that the emperor's got no clothes, that the patient is not really yet connected to the information system.
Right. So is your question around the connectivity that needs to surround the patient, or the
I guess one of the
patient
questions
accessing
was,
the data?
yeah, you were sort of asking what are the hurdles that we see, and I don't hear anybody talking about the absence of a medical body, a real viable, secure medical body area network being a hurdle, and it really seems to get in the way of a lot of things.
So I don't know that I agree with you. Again, I think the most powerful and most ubiquitous communications utility the world has ever seen is in everybody's pocket right now, and there is nothing separating us from using that as the primary distribution vehicle for healthcare, but the proper design and proper product development and working through any and all issues like every other industry has done, including the financial services industry. So right now you can get in touch with the most private of your information that if abused would be ruinous to you with all of your private financial data. But all of us do it because we trust the providers and we trust the infrastructure, and if they violate our trust, the market will take care of it. But we somehow think of healthcare as something that should be completely isolated from that.
Can I let me comment on that? I agree completely that the smart device is an incredible tool, and it is sitting in our pocket. Barnaby Jack showed that you can hack into a insulin pump or a pacemaker that's Bluetooth enabled at 300 feet. I think the problem is, how do we attach that smart device to the sensors that we wear or we embed in our body securely? I think that's I agree completely. The smart device, whatever iteration we're going to see over the coming decade, is how we get to the system. The question is, how does the system, how does that node connect to our sensors? So I think we're saying, go ahead.
I mean, I have to, actually, I think this whole privacy issue has been completely overblown. I mean, it has just been absolutely, as a physician who practices and sees patients all the time, I can tell you that half the patients are okay with sharing most of their data in a certain context. And when you look at, as a cardiologist who represents a large part of the disease population or what's causing the problems in this country, most of the solutions and the technology for those solutions are available, as we talked about, in your local retail store. So I don't really think anyone cares whether someone can hack into how many steps they took or what their weight was or what these things are. What they really want is to be healthier. And while HIPAA and there's a role and a place for those things, I think that if we're going to really move connected health, digital health forward, we have to get across this. And I'll be honest with you, it's the 50 and up that really care about this. But I mean, you have 20-year-olds posting pictures on Facebook. They don't care about privacy. Neither the 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds. And so I think that we have to realize that in this digital age, privacy is going to be reduced. And when you look at the drivers of chronic disease and the kind of tools that we have available, most people will tell you, you know what, if somebody hacked in to find out how many steps I had or what my weight was or what my blood pressure was on a particular day, they probably wouldn't care. And that is the risk you take. But when you look at the benefits, they're so great that I think we have to really start placing things in context.
Can I'll keep, no one else has anything to say.
Go on.
So I think that what it does is it precludes the possibility that, as opposed to just monitoring patients, that what we're really talking about is pushing monitoring and care or management out to the patient. And it's not really just a matter of security, it's reliability, it's robustness. Yeah. But the idea that eventually we're going to manage patients remotely, I think does make that an issue. So you're right, I don't think anybody cares about steps, but the fact that your insulin pump is probably going to be embedded, as will your glucometer, and that those will be sort of distributed intelligent networks, those have to be
I want to be
secure.
clear. I mean, I think I disagree with Samir's characterization of it, and I think privacy is the defining issue of our age, actually. I think it's the civil rights issue of our time, and I actually think that young people just have a different sense of privacy, but they manage it very differently with their online lives, but they actually do care about it. My point is that we can't, and I don't think you're saying this, so I think we're saying the same thing. You have to wade into it, and you have to manage it, and you have to define it, and you have to set up the right procedures and the right technologies and the right trust-based networks versus being scared of it. I think when I listen to a lot of privacy debates in healthcare, I think people either dismiss it or they're so afraid of it that they think it's a barrier that can't be addressed. My only message is that, like every other industry, one needs to embrace it, you need to wade into it, and you're going to make mistakes, and there are going to be companies which, and efforts which violate trust and pay for it, but you have to embrace it because it's too important, right? The healthcare applications of connected mobile technologies are so fundamental and so important that we have to embrace these questions and figure out the answers.
Yeah, I'm afraid our time for this panel is up, but I did want to leave one parting thought because we were talking about HIPAA and privacy and data flows and so on. So a lot has been written about HIPAA, about how we need to therefore, go a little bit extreme on how we protect our data, but I wanted to leave you with this thought that the biggest fine for HIPAA non-compliance so far was not because the data was leaked, but rather because this other flip side of HIPAA is that you have to give patients access to their data. And there was a hospital that refused to give the patients the data, and that was actually the biggest fine, logged so far. So it's something to keep in mind. No, I'm very pleased, feel very fortunate that we had such great panels and such wonderful conversation today. So I'd like for the audience for us to give these panelists a round of applause. Thank you.